The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Project Independence and You on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm Rebecca Miller, your host, along with, of course, Otto Lohse, our co-host at Project Independence and You. How are you this morning, Otto?
It's a good day. A little rainy, but good.
Good. Well, we're glad to have
you.
you
Here with you.
And we're glad to have you with us as usual. Also, we have Christina Liu, who is the radio show producer, along with the director of Senior Citizen Affairs for Project Independence. And she pulls these shows together now every week going into our 12th year. And of course, Dan Cox, who does everything else each week for us, supporting Project Independence in You and creating Project Independence in You. So we're so very glad to have all of you here. And today we have a great guest, Dr. Evan Schwarzwald. And Dr. Schwarzwald is a cardiologist at Northwell. And I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule, so we're going to, kidnap you for about an hour if we can do that. February is American Heart Month, so I'm glad to have you on board today so we could talk a lot about heart health, heart disease, and that. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So I know we have a lot of questions about the heart. Obviously, as we get older, there's a lot of changes. A lot of people start having to go on medication or different things like that. But just to kind of get an overview of the heart and how it works, if you could just, I don't know, in a minute or two, tell us, how does the heart work?
So the heart, as you know, is a vital organ. You can't be alive without it. It's an amazing machine, actually. It starts beating in utero when you're conceived. And it continues beating without a rest it can go 100 years or more, okay, if taken care of properly, okay? There isn't any man-made machine that we know of that could actually perform the way the human heart does. So for me, it's the most fascinating, one of the more fascinating organs in the body. It pumps blood through the lungs where as we breathe, we bring in oxygen. Oxygen is something that we need to burn fuel. So if you have a fireplace, you know that if you don't have a good updraft, you can't make a fire because you need the oxygen to pass over the wood so it can burn. It's the same thing. We need oxygen to metabolize our fuel, which is glucose. Okay, so glucose is the wood. The oxygen is combined with that, and we have metabolism, which provides us with something called ATP, which is not really necessary for you guys to know, but it is the currency of energy. It makes your muscles work. It makes your brain work. It makes all the different functions of the body work. So without the heart pumping oxygenated blood through the system, which it picks up in the lungs and then pumps out all through your body, including your brain, your arms, your muscles, your internal organs, liver, kidneys, all that stuff that's in your abdomen. If you don't have that, you can't possibly survive because you need energy to make all these organs work. So it is, one of the most important organs we have. You cannot survive without it. You can survive with one kidney, but there are two, so you can survive with one kidney, but you can't survive without a heart. So it is that and the brain are considered like the two major organs because that's where it all starts.
One of the areas that I hear a lot of times, it's a simple overview, and that is the heart has hardware and an electrical system. How just sort of differentiate between the two. So for people who might be listening who may not get that picture.
Right. So I just explained what it provides to us, what's the benefit of having your heart. But the heart itself structurally is correct. Got basically major systems in it. So it's got a vascular system of its own, which means it supplies oxygen to itself because it itself is a muscle. So when blood gets pushed out of the heart, believe it or not, the first thing it does, because it's a selfish organ, is it provides oxygen to itself. Okay, so it's providing that blood flow to itself. That's the first stop out of the heart. The second stop out of the heart is the brain. Okay, so that's the plumbing system that's pushing blood out. And then there's the structural things inside the heart that keep the blood flowing in one direction. Your blood is supposed to come in and come out and supposed to flow in one direction, and those are the valves. So that's the structure, the internal structure of the heart. And then there's an electrical system that makes the muscle contract and actually pump. So you have the plumbing, the structural, and the electrical system. So basically three main systems that make your heart function the way it does.
So, what actually, I mean, for me, it's always like fascinating to think the heart as a muscle. You know, it's not something you would kind of think of when you think of an organ. But is it, I mean, it's obviously more than a muscle. You know, when you think of a muscle, you're thinking of your arms, your legs, building muscle, that kind of a thing. So I always think, oh, you know, how does that kind of compare to a muscle, you know, in your arm or the rest of your body?
So believe it or not, on a microscopic level, it's very, very similar to your skeletal muscle. We call the muscles outside of the heart skeletal muscle. So what causes your bicep to contract is that the nerves in your brain are sending an electrical signal down into that muscle, and it causes it to contract. Now, we can't be consciously thinking about our heart beating every day. So the heart is special. Okay, it's got specialized tissue in it that automatically beats. And we talk about the pacemaker cell of the heart. Okay, so that's part of that electrical system. So we have a little battery in the heart that's functions on oxygen, basically, and that battery will fire off electrical pulses at 70 times a minute. So the normal heartbeat in a human is between 60 and 100. We use an average of 70 because that's where most of the population lives. So that is a pacemaker cell. It fires off 70 beats per minute. You don't have to think about it. It's an automatic thing that happens, and the heart will beat without you having to be conscious of it. Whereas your skeletal muscle, you have to think. You have to say, oh, I want to lift a glass of water and I want to drink. Believe it or not, that's all happening. You're not consciously thinking about it, but you are. There's parts of the brain that light up, and you know, we can see this on PET scanning or wherever. When you take a glass of water, that part's always going to light up because you're thinking about it. The heart doesn't work that way. It's automatic. And that's where it can get into trouble sometimes too.
Yeah, like looking at it from a top level, there's prevention, like the heart does give trouble, as you said. So how do you prevent it? And then if it happens, what can happen? You know, there's like, that covers a lot of territory, I understand. But
yes, I have this discussion with patients all the time because, you know, when a cardiologist say, hey, look, you know, you have something going on, everybody's like, oh, you know, I have something going on. How could that be? I was fine yesterday, you know, and it's shocking sometimes. And, you know, unfortunately, we have this disease called AGE, which not all of us have. Age is age, you know, and because as we age, we oxidize. What happens is, you know, the stress of fighting off the outside world all day long causes us to oxidize. And when we oxidize, there are free radicals and other things that get produced in your body. And it's very dependent on food and overall health. So that when we talk to people, we always say diet and exercise is a cornerstone of good cardiovascular health, and it is. And the reason why is because if you're going to oxidize, we want you to oxidize slowly. Okay, we cannot prevent age, but we want to oxidize very slowly. And when we oxidize quickly, and unfortunately, I just pulled up before we came on air some of the statistics, and not to be a Debbie Downer here, but you know, we have reduced death from cardiovascular disease every single year since 1970 until about 2 or 3 years ago. And believe it or not, cardiovascular disease is on the rise. We thought at some point that cardiovascular disease would go so low that it would actually dip below cancer. Okay? It won't. Cardiovascular disease is on the rise. Now, what's the explanation for that? I think that's the big deal because we're all affected by it right now. Our risk is going up statistically. And I show this to my medical students where I teach them to make them aware that this is an ongoing problem and we've got to look at it and drill down and figure out why. But if you look at obesity rates in the United States, they are off the chart. It is amazing how obese the country has gotten. If you go on the CDC website, they have maps of the country from 1970 to 1980 and from 1980 to 1990. And they have a series of maps and they color code it. And you see like blue and white. White is normal and blue is abnormal. And every state is getting more and more obese over time to where we have a huge obese population. The obesity is driving tremendous amount of disease. Obesity causes increased heart disease. It causes increased diabetes, which is an oxidative state. It makes you oxidize. It's unhealthy. We also have increased rates of cancer from obesity. So the obesity epidemic is what's driving a lot of what this increase is. And COVID did not help that either.
Right.
You know, everyone talks about the lungs and so worried about pneumonia from COVID, but what I see all day long is the fallout of vascular from COVID because COVID gets in through your blood vessels. The reason why it spreads from your throat when you get that sore throat, everyone says, I have glass in my throat when they come in. It's going into the blood vessels in the throat, and then it's spreading throughout your vascular tree, and it's going through your heart because your heart's going to pump all that through, and it inflames your heart as much as it can inflame your heart, your lungs. So COVID has also contributed a lot. The rates of MI, stroke, and pulmonary embolism are much, much higher after a COVID infection. It's like the best kept secret in America. Nobody talks about it, but we see it all day long in our office. You know, people come in 4 weeks after COVID and they're short of breath or they're having chest pain. They have a pulmonary embolism or they're having pericarditis or one of the other inflammatory diseases. So it's incredibly irritating to our systems. So between COVID, obesity, diabetes, and of course, cholesterol, let's talk about that. That's what blocks up your arteries, as you know. I just did a lecture on this, that only about half of the people who get out of the hospital with a heart attack, now these are people who are really damaged from heart disease, only 46% to 50% of them get treated appropriately with appropriate medication. And I'm talking aspirin, statins, the usual meds that we're all familiar with at this point. Only half of those people are actually getting adequately treated to meet guideline goals. It's almost astounding that in this day and age in 2023 that those are the numbers.
Yeah.
Shocking.
If somebody has like way back in my younger years, people really paid a lot less attention to the numbers that you were describing. Cholesterol. I remember, admittedly, I went in the Navy and had they checked my blood pressure. It was 140 over 100. They said that was fine. 100 plus your age, you're a little off. Clearly, that was not fine. And I learned, fortunately, at an early age, and I was able to get it controlled. But my question is, like cholesterol and plaque buildup and all that kind of thing, is that reversible at all? Like if the damage that you did years ago, can that be reversed? Or do you just have to build off of it?
I get asked that question all the time because, number one, my practice is more focused on prevention. Okay, I want to get to people at a younger age. I'd love to get young Navy guys in, because I think this whole thing starts at a younger age. But of course, once you have disease already, what can you do about it? Well, certainly eating a great diet and exercising has been shown in every single study known to mankind to be beneficial. So that goes without saying. I say I should have wallpaper in my office that should say, of course, diet and exercise. But what else can we do? Well, there's a lot of research being done now on looking at how low we can go with LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol, when you get your report from your doctor, there's a whole bunch of different cholesterols under there. And the main focus for us is LDL cholesterol. There's other things that your cardiologist will also manipulate, but the LDL is really something you need to pay attention to. That LDL should, if you have known disease, you should try to achieve your lowest possible LDL level that you can get. And of course, you have to talk about medicines there, because this is something that's not easy to do with just diet and exercise. And there's a compliance issue with that. As we all know, everybody has good intentions, but only 10% of the people who are given a diet stay on a diet. 90% don't. It's just the fact of life. So we have to use medications in order to keep our patients healthy. Driving your LDL level down, there has not been a study that I know of that showed that reducing LDLs from where they were, even if they're low already, like you may say, Otto, that my LDL is good. My LDL is 50. Doctor has it at 50. Now, we know the guide, the lab test says anything under 130, which most cardiologists just ignore now, because we know like 130 is too high. Mm-hmm. But, the labs don't change. The science changes, right? So you have to go with the science. And you might say you have an LDL 50 and that, you're great. Now, that may be okay if you don't have a lot of coronary artery disease or a lot of blockages in your arteries. But if you have a lot of blockages, or you had stents, or you had bypass surgery, or you have peripheral vascular disease, carotid disease, you need to push it, keep on pushing it down. Why? Because every study shows lower event rates, lower MI, stroke, and death when you lower those LDL levels. And some interesting stuff that's new, hot on the fire, and for us to be optimistic about, is that there are some trials that are being published. And again, I call this the edge of the universe, right?
You know what, Doctor? This sounds great, but we actually have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll love to hear about that. You're listening to Project Independence in You, Community Talk Radio. Our guest is Dr. Evan Schwarzwald, and we will be right back after a quick break.
So I get this call from my grandma, and she's like,
"What's a podcast, and how much does it cost?"
So I tell her, podcasts are like radio shows, but you can download them on any device and listen to them anywhere at any time, and they're free. And then she says,
"I see, but where can you find good ones?"
And I'm like, go to wcwp.org/podcast and check out the lineup of original shows, or download any podcast app on your phone or tablet and search for LIU Studios. And she's all like,
"Oh, that sounds easy."
And then she asked me what an app is.
LIU Studios podcasts, available on any podcast app. Those little button things on your phone screen. Just ask your grandkids.
And welcome back to Project Independence in You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm Rebecca Miller, along with Otto Lohse and Christina Liu and Dan Cox. And we've been speaking with Dr. Evan Schwarzwald, who's joining us today. February, of course, is American Heart Awareness Month, and you are a cardiologist. We're so happy and thankful to have you here for this full hour. So I don't want to waste any more time, because we're all listening. We're note-taking here. So
Great. Because, again, I have said there's reason to be optimistic, because
yes,
a lot of research is showing now that, and these are small studies, and I said the edge of the universe, so I don't want to, to be on the New York Times tomorrow being quoted that, oh yeah, heart disease is cured. But these are small studies. They're being published in the journals that we read. And we're seeing that they are doing some studies where they're actually driving LDL levels to extremely low levels. I'm talking LDLs of 10 and 20 or 0 even. Whoa. And they're actually measuring plaque volume by this new technique that they have, where they can actually thread a transducer or a sonogram, like you would get a sonogram for a baby or anything else, or a heart echocardiogram, down into a coronary artery. They can measure the plaque, so they can see not just the surface of the plaque, because the stuff that's in your artery is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the disease in the arteries is outside of where you can see it on an angiogram. So it's very, very interesting. People think like, oh, my angiogram is completely clear, so I have nothing to worry about. I can eat whatever I want. Let me go to Peter Luger and have a nice big steak. Incorrect. And that's why we are using these techniques to see what's underneath the surface. Okay, what's underneath the water? The iceberg is a lot bigger than you think. Now, how do we get to that information while you're young enough to do something about it? I think that's the key.
Right.
So now we use something called calcium scoring or CT angiography. There are two different techniques. I use calcium scoring because it's a 1 minute X-ray. There's no dye injection, and it gives me a quantitative number. It gives me a score. That score is directly related proportionally to your risk of having a coronary event over the next 10 years. So calcium scoring has really been an adjunct to our traditional screening tests, which are, blood pressure, blood tests. It's really an additional factor. And I think calcium scoring, if you have family history or you want to know what your cardiac risk is and you're, middle age to older age, this is not a bad way to peel the layer of the onion off, because by the time your stress test is positive, you have disease and well-established disease already.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you a question about disease. So people hear heart disease, and right away they think, well, I have high cholesterol. That's not me. I don't have heart disease is something else. And I think that the term heart disease scares people. Of course, the word disease has so many different connotations than maybe someone who only has high cholesterol or maybe hypertension. So what actually fits under that heart disease umbrella? Is it cholesterol? Is it the whole range?
It's a big umbrella.
Right.
So for most people, generically, and again, if I was talking to a cardiologist, I would say atherosclerotic heart disease, which means cholesterol plaque in your arteries.
Right.
But the general population, because atherosclerotic or cholesterol blocking artery disease is the most common manifestation of heart disease. Okay, there's many other types of heart disease. There's arrhythmias, there's muscle disease where the muscle doesn't work and the arteries are just fine. So there's a lot of different cardiac diseases, but the most common one in America is this. So it's been hooked to that. So when we say heart disease, many times people are referring to blocked arteries, not high cholesterol, because high cholesterol is a blood test. But heart disease means it's gotten to your arteries, and now they're diseased. When you have cholesterol deposits all over, you have disease.
I'm sorry, but you mentioned calcium scoring before, and frankly, on my own, probably 30 years ago or 25 years ago, I saw an article and it talked about this calcification thing. So I decided to go on my own back then St. Francis had a thing on Northern Boulevard, and I went there and found out that, you got a lot of calcification. So from that point on, they took a lot more aggressive stance in terms of controlling my blood pressure and getting my cholesterol to somewhat of a better level. But your point, I think, and I don't hear people talking about it that often.
Right. So, and this is where I think, maybe we're failing the public, because I think and Otto, I just want to ask you a question, if you don't mind answering that question, because we were talking offline a little bit before the show. You mentioned to me that you had an interventional procedure. At what age did you have that?
I had that 3 months ago at the age of 86.
Okay, so let's take Otto, who might have had a heart attack at 60, but because he was in the heart study that was done, and the original research for calcium scoring, by the way, was done on Long Island, and St. Francis was part of that trial. They were one of the original centers that actually pioneered calcium scoring. So they were recruiting people back then, and I had sent patients for it too, and that's how I learned about it. And you, if your natural history was to have a heart attack at 60, but because you knew you had a calcium score that was elevated, you went ahead and took more aggressive measures. You now took what was ever going to happen at 60 and you pushed it well into your 80s. Now, I'll sign up for that every day. If you told me that if I can take my heart attack that's going to come in a year or two for me, and I can have that 25 years later, sign me up. I'll take my chances 25 years from now, because technology will only be better. Don't forget, they didn't have stents. When you found out about that calcium score, we didn't even have stents, because we were only doing balloon angioplasty, and it was just the very beginning of that when you did that calcium score.
One of the other things that, like, I think that, and going to a doctor like you, and don't be afraid to talk to you and ask questions. Like, this whole thing started with me with I didn't have a real event. I didn't have really severe symptoms, but I walk. That's what my one form of exercise. And I felt a tightness that was a little different. And I thought, well, maybe I better say something. And I did, thank God, because if I didn't, 90% blockage, I probably would have been laying on the floor somewhere. No question about it.
So there's two things that helps you, right? Because number one, you knew you had coronary artery disease because you had a calcium score that was high way back when. You took more aggressive measures. You probably lowered your cholesterol. You probably ate better, and you probably exercised more. Now, if you didn't know that, the light bulb might not have gone off to even tell your doctor. And the other thing we tell people is, if you feel something, say something, okay? Because if you don't tell us when you come to the office visit, you may think it's insignificant, and you shouldn't tell your doctor. And I tell them, I'm like your priest. Come in and you come in confession and tell me everything. Tell me everything. What you think is trivial may not be trivial, okay? So you did the right thing. You felt something. You said, and I say, if it reached your consciousness, if it makes your epiphany go off, the light bulb go off, then you should tell your doctor. Because everyone tries to minimize it, even after they tell me it. Like, I have patients come in and go, yeah, I had a little tightness, but it was a bad day. I had stress at work. I go, okay, I got more questions for you. Okay. I start drilling down, and they just go, no, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing and nothing. Because our tendency is to never want to think anything is going on, right? That's human nature. We want to feel like we're okay. And it's not always the best way to approach this. If you feel something, tell your doctor, have a discussion, have some shared decision making about what to do, and move through the process, because that's the way you save lives. And that's why
even if you're younger, right? I actually had an experience 5 years ago where I'm a yoga instructor. I exercise. I was at LA Fitness, and I noticed over several months of stressful losing my father, my heart rate was going up to 200 before I even did anything. And it just kept happening and happening. And then I was at the gym and I mean, literally on the elliptical just started, and my heart rate went up to 220. So I got off, I went to in urgent care, and luckily a guy just started there. He was a PA, 30 years work for a cardiologist. And he said, this is not normal. You need to see a cardiologist. Turned out, after several visits down the road, I had AV nodal supraventricular tachycardia. I had a cardiac ablation at St. Francis, and I'm fine to this day. I mean, and it was just this random thing. It was like 54, 55 years old, and in pretty good health for someone my age. And it just wasn't right. I probably, had it not gone up so quickly that day, I probably wouldn't have gone to urgent care. I probably would have gone home, but it was so unusual. I said, let me just check this out. So you're right. I mean, just go, because.
Right. These things are very insidious. They're very subtle, like you said. You could see from Otto and from Rebecca's comments here that, it isn't like someone hit you over the head with a sledgehammer. Oh, you have heart disease today.
Right.
It's insidious. It's slow. It's an age-related thing. You were young your whole life. You're out working out. You're obviously a yoga instructor. You're in good shape. And then all of a sudden, one day, in the blink of an eye, something has changed. So we tell people that, you have to take the technology that we have, and we have unbelievable cardiac technology. It's unbelievable at this point. The stuff that we're doing and the stuff that's going on is unbelievable. For example, we put valves in through the legs, okay? Now, and I always use this, we're all old enough to remember the Rolling Stones, right? Remember Mick Jagger? Well, one day his cardiologist was following him for a period of time. He has a murmur and he has a valve that's maybe not doing so good. And one day he was like not feeling well, and he went to his cardiologist. And the next thing is the tour is canceled. He's going to get a new valve put in. They put it in through his leg, okay, in May. And August 1st, he was back on stage jumping around like he always jumps around. And he's still jumping around. So the bottom line is that we have tremendous technology now. We didn't have to operate on Mick Jagger. We just put a valve in through his leg, and he's back on stage and entertaining and making people happy. And, that's what it's all about. So
that's a great point, too, because, it's not like, I know what the procedure I had, I was told many, many years ago, that could have been an open heart surgery to try to find that point where my heart was racing, and I was awake the whole time, and it was under an hour. I was done. So it's not, it's scary, yes, but the advancements and the technology
that's in there. When we go in to do ablations, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just, they can map the entire inside of the heart with these catheters now.
Right.
There's all these procedures through the legs. We're doing stuff at North Shore that's also made it amazing, taking it even a step further now. So people are getting valves put in all the time. We're now putting clips on leaky valves, so we can fix a leaky valve. We used to have to open your heart for that, like you used to say. We have a huge structural heart program at North Shore. Okay, and we can clip valves now through the leg, put a little like a clothespin on a valve, and just shut down the leaking. Okay, so that it doesn't back up into the lungs and to other vital organs. We do this all the time now at North Shore. We're now pioneering some stuff that's not ready for prime time yet, but just imagine the valves that are being put in. They're doing CAT scans to try and figure out what the size of the valve is, because in the old days when you were surgeon, you open up the chest, you put your hand in there, you put a couple of different valves in, you size it, and you go, okay, this is the one that's good. Well, you can't do that anymore. Now you have to figure it out. So we have CAT scanning now, that CAT scans and models of heart, and then we now integrate CAT scan, MRI, and echo. So it's called multimodality imaging. And we take all that data, crash it into one big gigantic computer program, and then we take a 3D printer and print the inside of your heart from that data. And then we can take your heart in our hand, like I will take this heart here. Okay, here's a heart. I will get your 3D printed heart. I'll go, oh, okay, here's the valve. Let's take a couple of different valves off the shelf and put it in here and see how it fits. Now, this is your heart outside your chest that we created in a lab on a 3D printer. So, this is where it's all going. Now, is that ready for prime time yet? That's not ready for prime time yet, but it's going to happen in a lifetime. We will see 3D printed parts.
You mentioned technology. What about things like smartwatches? Is that something worthy for preventive purposes? Okay. So is it something that is valuable input to you to diagnose what's going on?
So look, they're in their infancy, these things, but wearables are going to be a huge part of cardiology in the future, because and your Fitbit will do heart rate. It'll do oxygen saturation. I think everyone since COVID knows what a pulse ox is these days. Okay, that you can measure oxygen from the fingertip, oxygen levels. It's going to measure the Brigham and Women. I was just at a grand rounds at North Shore, and they had one of the top people in the hypertension clinic up at Harvard. They're using a bracelet that's going to take blood pressure continuously all day long.
Ah.
Okay. So, now we have to struggle. We have to say, oh, buy a cuff, you got to take it home. You have to, keep little notes and, to know whether your blood pressure is really well controlled. That all is going to be revolutionized. You're going to have a watch, like my watch can tell me whether I have AFib, okay, which is a cardiac arrhythmia. So Rebecca, if she had a smartwatch on at that time, she might have got an alert on her watch. Hey, your heart rate's 200 beats per minute.
Right.
So
because I didn't feel it, which was really.
It's because when you're young and strong, you don't feel it.
No.
It's the crazy thing about it because you can still tolerate it. Now, if you were 30 years older, you might have passed out.
Right.
But that's what helps.
Okay. Well, I see Dan, which means that we have to take a very quick break. You're listening to Project Independence in You, Community Talk Radio. We're speaking with Dr. Evan Schwarzwald, all about cardiac health. And we will be right back after a quick break.
Take WCWP with you wherever you go with the WCWP app. Listen live 24/7 to all of our streams, all from one app. Plus, call the studios directly from the app and visit our social media. Download the app through the iOS App Store on Apple devices or the Google Play Store on Android by searching WCWP Radio or visit WCWP.org for links. The WCWP app, available now on iOS and Android devices.
And welcome back to Project Independence in You Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We're going to get right back to talking with Dr. Schwarzwald, who's just so much information. Where if you'll give us another hour of your time, I know Christina will have you back. We may never let you go. But two things. I have a friend actually who texted me and she's like, wants to understand her blood pressure. So when you say 110/60, what's the top number? What's the bottom number?
So the heart is contracting and relaxing. Okay. There are two very important, they're both important. People only think about the heart squeezing blood out, but it's just as important to relax that heart and fill it with blood. So the top number represents when the heart contracts its maximal force, and the blood pressure at the top called the systolic blood pressure. Systolic means squeezing. So the squeeze top number is the systolic blood pressure, and that is the driving pressure to perfuse your organs. Okay? If that gets too low, you'll pass out. Okay, if you don't have enough blood pressure to get to your brain is going to reboot, just like your computer will if you run out of battery. It's just going to shut down. The bottom number is called the diastolic blood pressure. Okay, and that is the blood pressure that occurs as the blood comes out. If you don't do anything to hold it out there, it'll dump right back into the heart. So we have something called the aortic valve that shuts behind it. So it's kind of like, I always tell people, it's like when the train door opens on the subway platform, all the people on the platform run into the train, and then those doors close so nobody can get it back out. Well, that's what your aortic valve does. Blood gushes out, the aortic valve closes behind it, and that pressure starts to come down because the blood is being distributed through all the organs. So it goes from 120, which is the normal systolic blood pressure, to 80 over a short period of time as the blood pushes through the capillary network into your vital organs to feed your vital organs blood from that particular beat. The diastolic blood pressure is the bottom number. It is also an important number because that is the only organ that doesn't get perfused during systole, during the squeezing part, is the heart itself. Because the heart's squeezing during that period of time. So the blood pressure there isn't the driving force to feed itself oxygen. It feeds itself during diastole mostly. Okay? So that diastolic blood pressure is the driving pressure of blood flow down your coronary arteries. So obviously, if that gets too low, that could be the reason for someone to have maybe symptoms,
Right.
chest pain, something like that.
So, of course, our listeners are mostly all seniors, except for my friends who are listening. Not yet, almost. They're getting there. So, one of the things you talked about early on in the show is how there's so much more heart disease associated with, obesity and COVID and those kinds of things. But also, our population has never been so old. I mean, how aged well. So, we've got, as you probably know, we've got 10,000 people a day turning 65 throughout the baby boomers that will go on for another 6 years. Plus all the older ones who are now probably in their early 70s. So you have this huge amount of aging population, plus the way other end where you've got seniors living well into their 90s and hundreds. We talk about this almost every show. When I was a kid, you very rarely heard of someone turning 90. It was so rare. And today we have Project Independence members who are still driving in their 90s or active. So there's that. And I'm wondering if you think that's another reason why, there's a little bit more heart disease. And the backup question, I guess the prequel to that is, how does the heart change as we age? What's like I don't want to say the timeline, like what happens when we're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, like what are the things that really change and on average? I know you can't specify. When do those changes tend to happen? Is it 20 years? Is it every 15 years?
Well, that is a moving target. I mean, let me address the first question first. I think that obesity in this country is a huge problem. I don't know whether any of you guys caught 60 Minutes about, maybe beginning of January. They're trying to get these new medicines that do work, these GLP-1s approved. But insurance companies don't want to pay for it, and it's a whole fight. There's an anti-obesity legislation going through Congress. I suggest people write into the legislators saying they support this, because right now obesity is a cosmetic diagnosis. Okay, in my life, it is a disease. Okay, and we need every bullet in our gun to try and help this, because the downstream cost will bankrupt the country. Okay, there's no doubt in my mind that you got 30 and 40-year-old young people that have BMIs of 37. Okay, that will bankrupt the country if it continues. We need to have a full onslaught on that. It's going to cause more cancer, more heart disease, more diabetes, and it will cost billions. So whatever we spend now is going to be a drop in the bucket. But unfortunately in America, we only think about today. We never think about tomorrow. And our children are going to be affected too. So your children and your grandchildren are going to get destroyed from that. So if you can support this anti-obesity bill to get CMS to change the categorization of obesity to an actual disease, that's going to go a long way to help us get the tools we need to fight it. That's the first thing, and that is causing disease at an earlier age. We're seeing more heart disease at an earlier age. And don't forget, I told you there's a tick up in cardiovascular disease. We're not going down anymore.
Right.
Okay. Despite the valves, the stents, all the magic that we have in the toolbox, calcium scoring, CT, MRI stress testing that's on the verge of being a big thing. All this stuff, all that technology cannot fight the epidemic that's happening right now. Now, are the baby boomers getting there? Of course, the baby boomers were on the tail end. Okay, I'm probably I think I'm the last year of the baby boom, actually, myself. Okay, and I think that, yes, our population is getting older because we keep people alive, because we've dropped cardiovascular disease mortality for the last 30 years until the last couple of years. So all the benefit now is coming home. And we're all aging into that. Then we got COVID.
You just said something, by the way. I have a friend who is obese and who actually called me because I think he thinks I have a lot to say through Project Independence, but it had to do with the medication that's available for diabetes. He's in his 70s, And because he's getting federal or Medicare, he cannot get discounts on that medication,
Correct.
which would help him. It's for diabetes, but it would also be beneficial to him for the obesity part of it. But he said it cost a fortune, and he can't do it because of the price.
It's $1,500 a month.
Is that the same? Yeah. What
Yeah,
plan?
it's the same thing I'm talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just,
What's the thing that you contact? You said there's a program, a
yeah,
bill.
so there's anti-obesity legislation that's in Congress right now. And if you look at this, there's a 60 Minutes on obesity that was aired about 6 weeks ago now. I think it was the beginning of January. And it was very insightful about the politics behind this stuff. You know, I always tell the patients, it's you and me, it's David and Goliath. I got the pea shooter, and I'm trying to shoot that giant right in the eyeball. But, you know,
We'll definitely have to do a show on that, huh, Christina? You know, we'll maybe coordinate something through that would be definitely, you know, important, because all you hear on the news every day is this diabetic medication that people are taking to lose weight. And, it's upset, obesity is, like you were saying, it's just rampant. And people, I mean, even though everybody, I think every adult surely knows what to do until it gets out of hand, how to lose weight. Everybody kind of knows the things to do, but for whatever reason, it just gets out. We just lose the I'm going to say control. We always say you can only manage, you really can't control anything. But, we'll definitely have to get a show on that. But I did want to talk too, because most of our listeners, again, are seniors, just about, kind of, I'm going to say the normal changes or what the changes are with the heart as we age.
So, it's really funny. I was at the Mayo Clinic doing some training. This was many years ago. And one of the participants raised their hand to the gentleman who's one of the gurus of echocardiography. And he said, "Isn't it normal for the heart to be stiff at a certain age?" And the gentleman said, "Well, my grandmother's 90 and I didn't let it go on her. She's in great health and always worked out and was super, super healthy person. She doesn't have any stiffness. So is it normal or abnormal?" So everything is a continuum.
Right.
Most of the time as we age, our arteries do have, and this may be because of the genetic makeup of America, and don't forget, we have a lot of different racial populations here. And by the way, they all have different incidences of heart disease. So when you go see your cardiologist, they have to be acutely aware that, Southeast Asians are not like Caucasians, and
right.
Americans
True.
are not like Caucasians. You have to be very race-centric to understand the genetics of these populations, because there's a lot of heart disease at a very young age in some of these populations. So you really must be aware of all those factors when you see patients. And we live in the melting pot here in New York, so we see them all. And we know which groups are more sensitive. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that we do, because of probably diet, the diet in America has been horrible for the last century, we accumulate lipids or fats in our arteries, and coronary artery disease is the number one heart disease in the country. So that is something and by the way, when does it start? It starts when you're 20 years old. Okay. So we know from automobile accidents, young people who drink and drive, they get autopsies, and a lot of times after these horrible automobile accidents, when they do the autopsies and they look at the arteries, they already have fatty streaks in their arteries, even at age 20. Okay. By the time you're 40, many of these patients have atherosclerotic disease already. That means they have enough cholesterol in there that's actually intruding into the artery. Like I said, most of it lives in the artery, but it doesn't go into the center part of the artery, which is the hollow part that carries the blood. Okay. But by 40 already, you have that going. Okay. And then most of the heart disease happens at 50, 60. It starts manifesting itself, and if you don't take intervention like Otto took, because he knew he had that's why those calcium scores are so important. Because I have a guy, someone, a man or a woman, comes into my office and they go, look, my dad had a heart attack, or my brother had a stent, or whatever their family history is, and I go, okay, we're going to do a calcium score on you even though you have a normal cholesterol, because we need to know the genetic milieu. It's not just the blood test, it's the genetics and the diet and the oxidation that you've been exposed to in your life. So how do you get to that? Well, calcium scoring is a great way of getting to that. And once you know you have a calcium score, you have the disease, the fuse is lit. It's the question of when the bomb goes off. Okay. Now you can do what Otto did and go, okay, my fuse is lit. I'm going to take an intervention here, get myself on a better diet, lower my cholesterol, maybe get on an aspirin, whatever you need, and take the fuse and put that bomb out to when you're 88 and say, I'll deal with it then, because the technology will be a lot better then than it will be now, and save your own life. Because he had the epiphany. That what saved his life, in my opinion, is that he had a calcium score. What age were you, Otto, when you had that calcium score?
Probably in my 40s, late 40s,
Wow.
50, maybe in mid 50s. Whenever St. Francis started doing that.
Yeah, and they were doing it when I was in training. So I was a fellow in 1995. So I would figure it was around 1995 when that, we were enrolling people into that study too. So, Long Island created a lot of great things. We invented the MRI machine. We pretty much invented calcium scoring. We have a lot to be proud of out here in Long Island. We use technology out here, and I know the institution that I'm working at North Shore, they're finishing their new surgical building where they're going to have all these hybrid ORs now, which are state of the art for doing these valves and putting them in without cutting people open, and putting the clips in and all these fancy devices that we have. I mean, it's absolutely outstanding the amount of sophisticated technology we have right here on the island. I always tell people, I go, you can schlep to Manhattan if you want, but I could tell you, we have everything out here. Okay. And we can apply that locally, so you don't have to run to the city to do anything. It's all available in your backyard. How lucky are you?
What it sounds to me like, a lot of things I heard here is that the need to educate people at a young age, and I look at myself and I go back to my earlier years, skin care, dental care. Now I'm hearing heart care. I even believe, frankly, PSA should start at an earlier age, because you need a baseline. I wrestled with that also in my past, and that worked out okay because I watched the PSA. All these things, I think there's a real need for education of younger people, and the things you talked about all around as far as your health goes. Will that message get through? I don't know.
Well, that's the problem. I think that there's a lot of stuff we can offer in prevention, and also stressing diet and exercise and not becoming obese. I mean, I had a young woman in my office yesterday who's 27 years old, and she's there because she's like, I gained 50 pounds during the pandemic. She gained 50 pounds. And I was like, bad family history. I go, we got to do something. We got to get, so I hooked her up with nutrition, medical weight loss. We're firing all the bullets at her right now. Now, you might say, well, it's a waste of money. She's 27 years old. She'll be fine. No, she isn't going to be fine. She's going to be a sick person, and she's going to cost everybody money. It's going to cost you and me tax dollars if she gets sick.
It's so important for this preventative testing. Even kids who are playing sports, they should all have EKGs. I mean, how many times do we hear, several times a year, of a young person collapsing on a field, undiagnosed heart condition or something like that? I think that, we just really should walk through machines once a year that, test everything.
Well, again, it's always about the cost you put in now and what you pay later. And Unfortunately, and you saw this with COVID, I think we all saw it with COVID. COVID was not controlled by the medical people. The politicians grabbed onto it like, we're going to make our name here on COVID. We're going to be heroes and they'll write books about us for 1,000,000 years. As soon as it got politicized, and unfortunately, a lot of what we do is politicized.
Well, I know that we have to go to a break, and a lot of great information. We want to thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Just unbelievable stuff. We'll take your information. So if anybody listening wants to get in touch with Dr. Schwarzwald and maybe make an appointment, or you can give 311 a call and speak to either Christine or myself. We'll be happy to connect you to him. Again, thank you so much for this vital information. We are most grateful of your time.
Thank you so much for having me.